ito yung sumunod na lesson right after the human person as an embodied spirit. Number one, our relationship with the environment is not simply biological, it's not simply physical, but more so, it is spiritual. The context of the embodiment of the spirit of the human person can be seen and appreciated in the context of the environment. We cannot speak of justice, of fairness, of freedom without first going to this context of nature or the context of environment. Later, you'll know why. Kasi ang gagamitin natin na uh, philosophical school of thought dito will be Taoism. Kaya pinapanood ko sa inyo kanina no, before we start, the philosophy of Lao Tzu and the beginnings and then the basic teachings of Taoism. Yan ang pag-uusapan natin. So before we begin, our most essential learning competency is for us to demonstrate the virtues of prudence and frugality towards environment. But I want to focus on the virtue of frugality. Frugality. I want you to Google or to open a dictionary and search for the meaning of frugality. I want you to Google or to open a thesaurus and look for the synonyms for the word frugality. Para mas kung ano yung makakatch na attention sa inyo doon na word, then use it in place of frugality. Para medyo may pag-sink in. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng frugality? But dyan iikot ang lesson natin this afternoon. So we begin with this quotation. Again, this is a philosophical reflection. Ang pinaka-main source natin will be Taoism. If we approach nature and the environment without openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety, may I add, frugality, and care will well up spontaneously. In this quotation, there are two opposite positions, two different kinds of relationship, of acceptance towards the environment. And later, as we unfold our lesson, makikita ninyo yan, anong klaseng relationship ba ang meron tayo sa environment, and what is the kind of relationship that we are called upon so that we can at least start building what has been destroyed. So let's see. So we proceed. The human person is part of nature. This is the first point. And again, it will be reiterated pag pumunta tayo sa Taoism proper. The human person is part of nature. The human life, both our body and our soul, is lived in a natural world. The natural world, on the other hand, enters our lives constantly in many different ways. And yung i-elaborate ko yung mga different ways na yan later when we talk about the relationship with the environment. Now, we spend time contemplating and reflecting on the beautiful wonders of nature. I hope kahit na pagising natin sa umaga, hindi man lagi tayo nakakita ng nature, ano? Hindi tayo nakakita madalas ng mga green, ng mga leaves, ng mga animals na nasa wild, hindi tayo madalas nakakita niyan. But we need to stay put and we need to contemplate on the wonders of nature because we are part of nature. We cannot do away with nature. Nature is undeniably part of our human life. So regardless whether nandun tayo sa setting or sa place wherein we are in nature, we can do away with nature because definitely na-influence niyan tayo. For example, I think that was 3 or 4 days ago, one morning, may nakaramdam na nag-shake yung lupa. No? There was an earthquake. So we cannot go away with nature. And then 2 days ago, Japan was hit by a 7.3 earthquake. So we cannot do away. Kahit nasaan pa tayo, we will still be affected by nature. The question is, how are we to respond or how are we to relate to nature? How are we to relate to nature? Now, there are different kinds of relationships with nature. So, meron ako bibigay na 5. Number 1 will be conflict. Conflict. Whether we like it or not, ito yung isa sa mga constant na relationship natin sa nature because we are part of nature. We fight against the hostile forces of nature. For example, yung earthquake, no? We fight against it, although wala talaga tayo masyadong laban doon, but preparedness because we do not know when an earthquake will happen. Typhoon, at least ang typhoon, alam natin, no? Being an archipelago beside the Pacific Ocean, we know that typhoons are normal na nakakaharapin natin bilang nakatira sa Pilipinas. We expect actually 22 to 26 typhoons a year. But we are in conflict with it because we prepare for typhoon. We fight its effects or aftermath after niyan dumaan. And yung pinaka-recently na hindi pa tapos yung laban natin will be fight against nature, particularly yung mga diseases. For example, yung COVID-19. Maaring magkaiba tayo ng pananaw, for example, sa source of the coronavirus na ang particular strain ay yung COVID-19. But definitely, one thing is for sure, it comes from nature because naging part yan or is parte ng sistema yan ng ibang animals. So they are found there. So we fight that hostile force of this pandemic, of this COVID. And at the same time, constant conflict, and we cannot do away with it. It's part of our life. When you wake up and when you sleep, we are in conflict with the hostile forces of nature. Number 2, much more negative rather than conflict will be domination. Domination. When we rule over nature, making use of what nature provides to enhance our life. Okay lang yun kasi we really need nature because nature provides for us. Pagkain, di ba? Our medicine comes from nature. Kahit masabihin mo na artificial and laboratory made yan. Yung ingredients niyan sa nature pa rin kinuha. But the problem is, ang attitude natin is a dominating attitude wherein we place ourselves on top of everything, particularly on top of the environment, making us kings and queens, the total in control. Kaya ano na nangyayari? You see the pictures. Those are symptoms and signs of the reign of the human person over the environment. That's domination. Now, the third one will be the more passive kind of relationship, and this will be observation. And sometimes you cannot prevent it simply because when we see nature, we are in total awe. Wow. Diba? We stand at a distance and we view the beauty of nature. Para tayong mga ignorant na first time nakakita ng nature. Kasi nga, bihira lang naman talaga tayo makakita ng ganito in real life. Particularly kung lumaki tayo sa city, lumaki tayo sa mga subdivision, na puro bato lang ang nakikita natin at mga artificial na damot, etc., etc. But when we stand doon sa beauty, natural beauty of nature, ang una natin gagawin talaga, we observe. All of our senses are very active. You can smell the grass, you can smell, yan yung experience ko, yung dagat, I can really smell it. Iba yung amoy niya, and this is somewhat invigorating and refreshing. Ang hindi ko malilimutan dyan, yung nasa pinakataas, that ang view na yan is Mayaw-Yaw Rice Terraces. Wala masyadong nakakaalam sa Mayaw-Yaw Rice Terraces kasi ang madalas pinupuntahan si Banawe Rice Terraces. But most of them, nasa Ifugao sila. Pero ito yung mas malapit na napuntahan ko. Bago ko makarating dyan, dahil nga bihira ang bus na dumadaan, tsaka nakatakot ang bus, masyadong makitid yung daan. Masyadong makitid. So, motorcycle will be the safest. Pero hindi ko naramdaman na safe ako dahil alam mo yung takot, On my right side will be mountain, rock formations. And then on my left will be bangin. At sa bangin na yun, makikita mo yung view of different landforms na nandoon sa Ifugao. So, Hindi ka makadikit masyado dun sa bato, sa wall on my right side. Hindi ka rin pwedeng dumikit masyado kasi mahuhulog yung motor mo dun sa bangin. So, nakakatakot. But then again, nakikita mo yung beauty na yon. You cannot help it but to see it and to look at it because it's really beautiful. That's observation. And ito yung pang-apat, this is the most ideal kind of relationship with nature, companionship, wherein nature contributes to the welfare of humanity, and in turn, we contribute to the betterment of nature. Again, ang sabi ko, ideal. But in reality, wala tayong masyadong companionship with the environment as manifested by our current problem ngayon, that we are facing, yung environmental crisis. Kasi we have a broken relationship with the environment. We have a broken relationship with nature. Wherein, we only benefit, para tayong parasite minsan, we only benefit from what nature provides. Pero ang ibinabalik natin, instead of something that can contribute to the betterment of nature, what we return are yung mga waste products. For example, I do not castigate mining because mining is necessary. Diba? Hindi tayo pwedeng maka-plastic dito. Anti-mining tayo. We cannot have laptops, we cannot have our gadgets without mining. Diba? Kaya lang, ang inalabanan natin dito yung indiscriminate mining. Yes, we cannot replace the minerals na kinuha natin sa ilalim. But we can rehabilitate yung nasa ibabaw. Yun ang hindi na ginagawa. Yun ang bihirang gawin ng mga mining companies. Kinuha na ngayon nasa ilalim, hindi lang na nakabuyang-yang yung sinira nila. Iniwanan pa ng mga toxic chemicals, di ba? Particularly mercury, kasi yun yung azogue in Tagalog, if I'm not mistaken. Yung ginagamit nila sa pag-separate ng metal doon sa bato or sa lupa. No? And then, ganun din sa dagat, yung ginagawa natin. Plastic, for example, yung ingredients yan came from nature. Pero ang binalik natin sa nature, yung waste product. Yung waste product. There's no companionship. But the ideal is, ito yung call sa atin, to restore that kind of relationship, we contribute also to the betterment of nature. And lastly, this is a rather philosophical kind of relationship, absorption. When we are caught up in the pattern of life provided by nature. And then we are guided by the wisdom of nature. Mga katutubo ang inilagay kong picture dyan because they are the most, how do you say this? They are the most nature-absorbed people in nature. They are part of nature. And then later, babalikan ko itong sasabihin ko na to, no? They can read the language of nature. Some of them cannot read letters, words. They cannot read. But they can read the language of nature. Anong ibig sabihin pag humangin ng ganitong klaseng hangin? Anong ibig sabihin kapag, for example, yung arrangement ng stars ng constellation sa langit ay ganito? No? They are caught up in that pattern and they learn from that pattern. Kaya nga makatutubo natin, kahit wala sila, sabihin natin illiterate sila, they know something that we do not. Di pa nag-progress ang science, for example, noon, pero alam nila kailan sila pwede magtanim ng ganito. Kailan sa Pilipinas, kailan pwede magtanim ng palay. Kailan dapat ine-expect na mag-harvest. They know that. Even before the colonialization of Spain, they have their own system. Because ang nagturo sa kanila, nature. Their observation and their experience of nature. The early philosophers, the pre-Socratics, since they are natural philosophers, they also have this kind of relationship of absorption. Doon nagmula yung question nila, for example, what is reality made of? It's their experience of nature. How they answered the question is also related to nature. Water, fire, earth, absorption. Now, from these 5 kinds of relationship with nature, I want you to choose 1 or 2 or probably 3 na kung alin dyan ang pipiliin ninyo. And I want you to write it down in the chat box. This will be our last recitation for this quarter. Is it a relationship of conflict? Although we cannot do away with it, huwag nyo na piliin yan kasi constant yan talaga ang isa sa mga relationship natin. Is it a relationship of domination? wherein we rule over nature? Is it a relationship of observation? You merely stand at a distance? Or is it a relationship of companionship, the ideal call, the ideal relationship? Or simply absorption? You learn from nature. You catch everything that nature is presenting to you. Now, what kind of relationship? You may write it down on the chat box now. Ay, nakamute pala ako. No? Binabasa ko lang yung nakasulat. Oo, nalimutan kong buksan. Alright. Keep your answers coming. Let's continue. So yan, pili lang kayo dyan. Now we go to our proper reflection of Taoism. The Taoist view of nature. The Taoist view of nature. Now, one distinctive approach to nature is one provided by this Chinese philosophy of Taoism. We will not treat Taoism as religion now. Kasi sabi ko nga sa inyo, no, pag Eastern philosophy, ano rin yun? Eastern philosophy is equal to religion. Pero ang gagamitin natin ngayon, simply the philosophical approach of Taoism. Now, the way of thinking of Taoism emphasizes that the human person is part of nature. Kanina sinabi ko na, we are part of nature. Our life is caught up in a greater reality. Ang tawag nila sa greater reality ay Tao or Tao. Ibig sabihin yan, path. Path. But in other translation, we can use nature. We are caught up in the greater reality, which is nature. Ayan. And since we are caught up in that greater reality, we cannot live a completely independent and separate existence. Ang problema kasi natin talaga naging pattern na natin ito eh. We tend to isolate ourselves from nature. It's as if we are not part and we do not belong to nature. We isolated ourselves. O yun yung ang end result nun yung domination eh. That kind of isolation, ang end result nun yung domination. It is the human person ruling over the environment. Now for Taoism that cannot be. Because for Taoism there are several approaches on how they can say that the human person should not live completely independent and separate the existence of the human person from the environment. Ito yung mga nalimutan na natin na mga notion that Taoism will remind us today. Number one, nature is sacred. Nature is sacred. Hala sir, animism. In animism, yes, they treat nature as sacred. The great spirits are in nature. Nature deserves, for Taoism, nature deserves to be honored and revered in its majesty, its wisdom, and its power. Ano ibig sabihin niya? Right after, but the result of Enlightenment period and modern philosophy is the sacrilege of nature. I'm sorry, but I need to discuss this. The sacrilege of nature. Before the Enlightenment and before the may contribution din dito yung mga mga what they call this, yung mga Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But the height of this kind of thinking applied or happened during the time of the Enlightenment and the modern philosophy. Siyempre in Christianity, in Islam, and Judaism, we cannot simply refer to nature as sacred without reference to the supreme being or to God. But in science, totally tinanggal yun pareho. The reverence to God and the reverence to nature. Kasi in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, may reverence to nature eh. Bakit? Nature is created by God. The problem is, in Enlightenment period and modern philosophy, they remove that notion. Number one, they remove the notion of a God. And number two, they remove the notion of the sanctity of nature. Meaning, what became God during the Enlightenment and in the modern period is science. Science became God. Bakit? Science ruled over the different school of thoughts. Even in philosophizing. Philosophizing became scientific. It is because of Rene Descartes. Theology naging scientific. Walang problema doon because nakita natin kung ano yung naging effect niyan. Kailan nalimutan natin itong mahalagang aspect na ito? How to respect nature. And since we do not treat nature as sacred, since the human person is part of nature, we no longer treat the human person also as sacred. It comes in, parang end result yan ng ganong klaseng thinking. We try to manipulate now nature. We try to manipulate nature. Sabi ng Taoism, nature should be, we should accept the ways of nature. We let it be the way that it is, no? Kaya nga sabi ng Taoism, it is sacrilege when the human beings fight against nature or they try to change the basic order of nature or the natural laws. It's sacrilege. We cannot change the natural laws. We cannot change the basic order. But because we deified science, science can change the basic order. We forget this kind of reality. And then itong babasahin natin na quotation na ito will be the end result of that kind of relationship. When nature is no longer viewed as sacred, when nature is viewed solely as a source of profit and gain, that's the society that we live in now. This has serious consequences for society. Not only for the environment, but also for the society. This kind of mindset has engendered immense inequality, injustice, and acts of violence against the majority of humanity. Since resources that comes from nature end up in the hands of the first comer, ends up in the hand of the most powerful, the winner takes all. Kasi we view nature as simply a source of profit and gain. Okay lang naman kasi we benefit from it. Kaya lang ang nagpaiba sa word sa sentence na ito yung solely. Yun lang ang pagtingin sa nature. It's not companionship. It's actually a more parasitical kind of relationship. Completely at odds, the complete opposite of this kind of mindset are the ideals of harmony, justice, fraternity, and peace. And this kind of mindset happens only when we view nature as sacred. Next, nature's power influences everything. Nature controls. Tingnan nga natin how nature controls, for example, our growth. How nature controls or even influence our growth. Anyone? Pwede tayong gumamit ng science dito kahit paano. Nature controls. Ito napansin ko no sa mga answer ninyo sa sa philosophical sa picture, yung performance task number 3 ninyo. Mamaya na lang kasi baka may mawala tayo sa Even again, ano yung mga example that can prove that nature controls or influences our growth? Anyone? Balikan niyo yung bio nyo. Bio 1 and 2. May control yung nature may control. Kapag walang ganong mechanism, ulitin ko ulit. Ano yung mga justification or evidence na mabibigay natin based on biology that nature can control and influence our growth? Kasi nature's power influences everything. Evolution, all right? Any other answer? Gusto ko yung pinakasimple na pwede nating makita or pwede nating ma-experience ngayon. Of course, you cannot experience evolution that simply or that instantaneously. Yung it happens every day. Happens every day. We take it for granted, but it happens every day. Biology. Particularly kung kayo ay nag-discuss about nakikita ko na yung mga sagot. Particularly when you discussed about the endocrine system. Endocrine system. Wala. Food. Of course, may influence yung nature sa food production or sa pinagkukuhaan natin ng pagkain. Not literally food production. Sufficient supply of food, water, energy, and biodiversity. Okay. Oxygen. Okay. Pwede. Oxygen. We know how important oxygen is to our brain and to the different organs of our body, and oxygen comes from nature. That's one. Any other answer? Endocrine system. Homeostasis. Weather. Okay. What gland is responsible for the release of melatonin? What gland is responsible for the release of melatonin? Melatonin. Hindi melanin ha, melatonin. Melatonin. Pineal gland. Thank you. Thank you. Pineal gland. Now, kailan natitrigger si pineal gland to release melatonin? Kailan natitrigger si pineal gland to release at night or in darkness? At night or darkness. No? Kasi yun na magko-condition sa body natin that it's time to rest, it's time to sleep. And we all know how important sleep is in our body. Bukod sa nire-regenerate tayo yung energy natin, yung ibang organs natin, especially our internal organs, yung mga cell division, yung mga replacement of dead cells happen during the night when we're asleep. Kapag umaga naman, natulog ka ng tanghali, o walang kinalaman si melatonin dito, when you are asleep, the pituitary gland or the responsible for the release of the growth hormone, dun sila nagre-release para pumunta sa mga bones, particularly in the epiphyseal plate, para magkaroon ng growth. No? That's nature's power that can influence even our biology. But what I want to focus is the metaphorical darkness or the metaphorical influence of nature. Because nature, an instance of that kind of experience or that kind of control is found when nature brought night in our life. When nature brings darkness into our life. For instance, I think elementary kayo na nagkaroon ng Yolanda, if I'm not mistaken. Ako ay nagtatrabaho na ako noon. Ayan, Yolanda. The strongest typhoon to date. Now, nobody expected, although we expect typhoons, but nobody expected that Yolanda will be that catastrophic, that deadly. No? And that is part of nature. That is the power of nature to bring darkness or night into our lives. Bakit? Doon niya sinasabi, teka lang, tignan niyo yung ginagawa ninyo. It can control our mindset. We can think, what happened? Bakit may ganitong klaseng bagyo? Na nakita naman natin yung naging effect. Na hanggang ngayon, hindi pa ganun ka 100% nakakabangon yung talagang dinaanan nito ni Yolanda. That kind of darkness invites us, nature invites us to be sensitive and to think. Doon ka lang mapapatanong, what might be the root cause of this? Parang last year, ito pinaka-recent, nung bumagyo sa northern Luzon, even in Rizal area, nagkaroon ng madaming soil erosion. Nung nagtanong bakit nagkaganon, anong tinurong reason? Mining, indiscriminate mining and illegal logging. Nag-ingay tayo nun. Kasi nature, naramdaman natin yung kanyang presence, yung darkness that nature can bring us. Nag-ingay tayo. Pero after how many weeks, given a few weeks, wala na ulit. Again, nature will be forced again, although ganun talaga conflict, but yung sometimes yung mga hindi mo inaasahan talaga na nangyayari because of what we are giving to nature. Hihintayin na lang ulit natin ang ganun kalalakas ng mga bagyo para ulit mag-ingay tayo na baguhin natin yung ginagawa natin sa environment. Laging ganun no? Until we experience it. Tapos, if we will not learn from that experience, we will not change. Ulit-ulit lang. Alright? So that is that nature's power influences everything. And of course, the patterns of nature. Sa principle ko, we can only go with the flow with nature. Kasi sa akin, in principle, in ideals, in philosophy, I am not a go with the flow. Most of the time, I resist the current. But in terms of the pattern of nature, it is wise, sabi ng Taoism, to follow the flow of nature. It is wise if the human person fits into the rhythm of nature, kasi nga pangalandakan nila palagi ng Taoism that we are part of nature. And it will do you no good if you will resist. Move with nature. Move with nature. To elaborate on that, let's read this. The Taoist vision of human life demands, first and foremost, that we be sensitive. We should be aware of these rhythms of nature that are flowing even within ourselves. Our mind must be free of our own personal desires and concern. Remember yung video kanina? We must be an empty vessel. We must empty our vase. We must be free of our own personal desires and concerns so that we might be sensitive to the demands and intentions of nature. Secondly, the vision of life demands that we accept wholeheartedly the directions of nature. To each of the commands of nature, we should say, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom. Ba, kumanta na ako, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom. That's patterns of nature. Sensitivity to the pattern of nature. Now, of course, we cannot go away with the relationship of the human person with nature. So the Taoist view of the human person. Again, the human person is part of nature. But I would like to point out here is that the human person should not be understood by himself. Dito tayo nagka-problema after the Enlightenment and modern philosophy. We tried to understand the human person as man is the measure of things that they are, and of things that are not that they are not. I hope you can still remember. We try to measure the human person by means of the human person himself or herself. We try to we forgot that we can understand only the human person in the context of, number one, environment, of nature. Because the human person is not a separate or an independent self. Again, may problema yan kapag sineparate mo ulit si human person from nature. In Taoism, the human person, since the human person is part of nature, is called upon again to be sensitive to nature. Kasi pag naka-isolate ka, you cannot feel what nature feels. Tayo mga tao, we are experts in building walls. We isolate ourselves. In Taoism, the human person is called upon to be sensitive and to respond to it in a fitting way. Now, let's read this. At least there is a growing sensitivity to the environment. Nakita natin yan ngayon, ano? And the need to protect nature, along with a growing concern, both genuine and distressing, for what is happening to our planet. Our goal is not to amass information kasi effortless, and at the same time, hindi yan nagkakaproduce masyado ng action, or hindi nakaproduce yan ng proper behavior. No, and doon lang naiwan lang sa knowledge level. Our goal is not to amass information or to satisfy curiosity, but I would like you to write this down. Rather to become painfully aware. It is the kind of sensitivity that we are called to feel. Painfully aware. To dare to turn what is happening to the world into our own personal suffering. Because when nature suffers, we also will suffer. If nature is in peril, we are also in peril. Because we are part of nature. Yan yung nalilimutan natin. And thus, dun lang makita natin, thus to discover what each of us can do about it. Kahit taon-taon mag-meeting, ang world leaders, they will meet how to combat the environmental crisis na ang projection, ang effect nito ay mas devastating pa sa effect ng pandemic. Kahit taon-taon o quarterly pa sila mag-meet, if they will not become painfully aware, if we, di lang they, if we will not turn what is happening into the world into our own personal suffering, nothing will change. Maki-earth hour ka pa every day. Kahit maki-earth hour ka pa, kahit, di ba once a year lang earth hour, gawin mong everyday yun. Kung hindi mo nararamdaman yung pain ng nature, nothing will change. Kasi then and only then, we can discover ano ang magagawa natin. Now, these are some ways on how to respond. Pero summarize ko yan dito. The current global situation, our current society, engenders a feeling of instability and uncertainty, which in turn becomes a seedbed for collective selfishness. When people become self-centered, kaya nga ang call sa atin is to empty the vessel. Empty yourself. Why? Because when we become self-centered and self-enclosed, our greed increases. And the root cause of that greed, yung sunod na sentence, the emptier a person's heart is, the more he or she needs things to buy, own, and consume. Sabi, i-empty natin yung sarili natin. But yung irony nun, since our heart is empty, instead of emptying ourselves totally so that we can feel and we can be sensitive to the needs of nature, hindi. Since our heart is empty, we try to fill it with material possessions. That sometimes contributes to the destruction of nature. For example, the number one world polluter, diba last year, diniscuss natin ito sa Earth Science, yung mga estudyante ko last year, pag hindi kayo sumagot dito, babawiin ko talaga yung grade nyo doon. What is the number one global polluter? Excuse yung mga hindi ko naging estudyante. Pero yung mga naging estudyante ko, dapat sumagot kayo. What is the number one global polluter? Ako, lagot tayo dyan. Lagot tayo dyan, peers. Hindi yan number one. Number two yan. Ang number one, burning of fossil fuel. That's one. Pero yung number two, doon tayo pinaka-guilty. So, yung number two, fashion. Fast fashion. Diba? Pinag-aralan natin last year how fashion contributes to the carbon footprint, diba? In environment. Kung gaano ka unstable yung system of the fashion industry. Tapos bili tayo ng bili kung ano yung fad, kung ano yung trend. Hindi naman tayo kagaya ng Australia na sustainable ang kanilang fashion kasi umiikot lang sa bansa nila yung production ng damit. Sa atin, kung saan-saan pa nanggaling yan, kaya nag-iiwan ng carbon footprint. No, tapos, buti nga ngayon, wala tayong, kada section may shirt. No, at least nakabawas-bawas sa ganitong klaseng lifestyle. And sometimes, it is a manifestation of an empty heart. Hindi lang sa damit, minsan sa ibang bagay. Ako, I'm asking the same question time immemorial. Yung pagbili ko ba ng books, is it a symptom? Tanong ko sa sarili ko, as I reflect, ang pagbili ko ba ng books ay symptom ng pagiging empty ng aking heart? Siyempre, ako lang din makakasagot nun. But that's my question. That's my reflection. Baka bili ako ng bili, hindi ko naman kailangan. So far, binibili ko naman, binabasa ko naman sila. And nagagamit ko sila sa pag-aaral ko. Kaya lang, sometimes no, kailangan mo rin kontrolin ng sarili mo. Hindi ka dapat bili ng bili. Hindi dapat ako bili ng bili. Kaya nga ngayon, ang ina-advocate ko na binibili ay mga PDF format, soft copy. Ayan. Para medyo pero saka dami na rin, hindi ko na alam saan ko ilalagay. It's also a questionable para sa akin no, pagka ganoon na nag-amas ako ng sobrang dami ng books. Although, nakalagay naman sa last will and testament ko, pag nawala ako sa library, mapupunta itong mga books na ito. Okay, ibigay sa iban. But that's one of our reflection today. Yung lifestyle ba natin is a manifestation of an empty heart. An empty heart, hindi yan yung emptying the self. Kasi pag empty ang heart, we fill in ourselves with so many things to satisfy the emptiness that we are feeling. And kapag ganyan ang feeling natin or yung heart natin, we cannot feel. Tayo ay pusong bato, tayo ay manhid sa growing needs and sa situation ng ating environment. Kaya ang conclusion natin, tigat-tigat sa conclusion, let us learn from the Mangyans. Hindi sila Taoist, but naturally, because they are living with nature, maaring sabihin natin that they follow the way of the Tao. Learn. Let us learn from the Mangyans. Sa lahat ng indigenous people ng Pilipinas, sa kanila lang ako may exposure. Hindi ako na-expose sa Aita, hindi ako na-expose. Sa Ifugao, na-expose ako, kaya lang, hindi ko sila masyado naka-interact. Ang naka-interact ko, itong mga Mangyan. Now, as our conclusion, let us learn from them. Paano? Their lifestyle. Alam niyo itong mga Mangyan, they respect creation. They respect creation. Wag lang silang mauuto talaga tsaka magagamit ng iba, but they respect creation generally. In particular, yung mga mountains and forests. The number one group that conserves forests and mountains in Mindoro, of course, yung mga talagang taga Mindoro, yung mga Mangyan. Bakit nila, sa totoo lang, pagka sinabi mo sa kanilang kagubatan at kabundukan, counterpart nun yung kanilang buhay. Bakit? Doon sila kumukuha ng kakainin nila. Number 2, doon sila kumukuha ng mga halamang gamot na ginagamit nila. Panggamot sa kanilang mga may sakit. Number 3, bukod sa doon sila nakatira, doon nila pina-perform yung kanilang religious rituals. And number 4, doon din sila bumabalik pag namatay sila. Doon sila inililibing. So they respect creation. They respect forests and mountains. Kasi they belong there. The Mangyans, aside from that, babalikan ko yung sinabi ko kanina, can read the signs of the environment like a book. Ako, nagbabasa ako ng book. Sila ang binabasa nila, environment. Example, when we went up the mountain to visit a Mangyan village, yung tour guide namin na Mangyan, after 1.5 to 2 hours of walk, nagpapahinga kami, kumakain kami ng baon namin, and then may mga prutas na pinitas siya doon. Sabi, bilang humangin. Tapos sabi niya, baka pwedeng bumaba muna kayo. Baba muna kayo. Huwag na muna tayong tumuloy. Sabi namin, bakit? 2 oras na lang lalakarin, kalahati na. Kalahati na. May pagkasama paman din niya mga Mangyan. Pag tinanong mo sila kung nasaan na, malapit na ba tayo? Ang sagot lagi nila, oo, malapit na, andyan na lang, andyan na lang. Ilang oras pa yung andyan na lang nila na yan. Sabi nila, bumaba muna kayo. Pag tingala, bakit kami bababa? Sabi niya, uulan ng malakas. Tingala kaming ganun nung kasama ko. Sabi ko, nung uulan, itaas-taas ang sikat ng araw. Sabi niya, bumaba muna kayo, uulan ng malakas. Yung hangin na yon, ang ibig sabihin, uulan ng malakas. Pag hindi kayo bumaba, maiipit kayo dito sa taas. Bumaba kami. At pagdating namin sa seminaryo ulit, pagbalik namin sa tinutuluyan namin, umulan nga. Talagang tawa kami, hala, buti naniwala tayo doon. Kung hindi, stranded tayo doon. They can read the signs of environment. Pakialam ko kung humangin. Sabihin ko lang nun pag humangin, ang sarap naman ng hangin. Pero sila nabasa nila anong ibig sabihin ng hangin na yun. I cannot explain it scientifically. No one can explain that scientifically. They know. Ganun ba ang hangin? Para-pareho ba ang hangin? Sa atin minsan para-pareho lang eh, di ba? Pag umihip sa mukha mo, hangin yan. Mainit man, ang kaibahan lang sa atin, mainit o malamig. Kasi pag lumabas ka ngayon, pag sumalubong sa mukha mo, mainit na hangin. Pero sa kanila, ibig sabihin pala yun. That their lifestyle as well. Yung prutas na pinitas niya kanina, mapapansin mo kung ilan lang kami, yun lang ang kinuha niya. Kasi kung ako yung namitas nun, may dala akong plastic. Pababa ako ng seminaryo, pasalubong. Anong prinsipyo ng mga mangyan? Bakit ganun lang? Number 1, may aakyat pa ng bundok. May kakain pa. Number 2, yung mga hayop sa paligid, kinakain din yung bunga. Pag inubos mo yon, wala na silang kakainin. Kumuha ka lang ng tama at dapat mong kainin. Yung mauubos mo. Huwag kang kumuha ng sobra. That's their lifestyle. Pati sa pag-hunting nila, no, they do not overhunt. Sila nga yung manifestation of frugality. Sila talaga yung manifestation niya. Pag nakakita sila ng buntis na baboy, for example, ito kwento, hindi ko naman naranasan itong pag-hunting nila ng buntis na baboy. Pag nag-hunting sila ng buntis na baboy daw, hindi napapatayin yun. Kukunin nila yung mga iba ng ibang baboy. Kasi yung mga anak ng baboy na buntis na yun, sooner or later, yun naman nakakainin nila eh. Bakit kailangan natin iluto yung buntis na baboy? And most of the time daw, sa isang village na yon, yung isang baboy na yon, tama na sa kanila. They will share it among themselves. Even yung kanilang pangingisda. Mindoro is an island surrounded by bodies of water. Sila yung mga grupo na ang ginagamit nilang pangingisda ay yung pag nakahuli sila ng isda, yung mga maliliit na isda ibinabalik nila sa dagat. Wala na tayong consciousness gano'n yan. Kasi nga, again, yung relationship natin, we view nature solely as our profit. Pero sila hindi. Balik mo kasi paglaki niyan, manganganak yan, diba? Dadami ulit yung isda. Bakit naubos yung tawilis, for example, sa Taal? Overfishing yun eh. Diba? Mas magtataka tayo. Ganun sila mamuhay. They exemplify the saying, live simply. Not for the sake of living simply, pero may goal that others may simply live. Not just their fellow human beings, but also the animals surrounding and also guarding the forest. That's how we should learn from them. Again, this philosophical reflection is actually hitting our consciousness. And then we should ask ourselves, let's prevent from looking from others. Let's look at ourselves. Gaano na tayo kalayo or gaano na tayo kalapit sa lifestyle ng mga indigenous people since they are part and they respect nature. Nakatulong sa atin yung mga meron tayo ngayon. Hindi natin pwedeng itanggi yun. Kailangan natin kung ano yung meron tayo ngayon. Kaya lang, ang question doon, baka nag-accumulate tayo ng na-accumulate na mga akala natin kailangan natin, yun pala hindi. To the extent of unconsciously contributing to the destruction of nature. Of course, nobody will blame us, no one. But in the end, napapatanong tayo eh. Since nag-lesson na tayo din ng ganito, baka meron tayong contribution, no? Hindi natin alam. Kailangan natin yung alamin. Bakit? Kasi we need to do something.